Okay, welcome everyone to, I guess, an informal service honoring our friend Libby Goldstein. I met Libby before the garden, and she was kind of inspiring. I'm a community activist myself, and here was this woman, had a lot of similar history. You know, our families were quasi-communist in the 50s and all kinds of unusual bad things that you weren't supposed to do. And she told me a story about she was going to create this garden. And I thought, that sounds like an interesting idea. I never even thought about them. You know, you grow up in the city, you don't have to think about gardening. You think that's for suburban people. So she got this property somehow and magically created this amazing thing that grew and got better and better. And Isaiah immortalized her up there. If you read it, it says Libby's dream. And part two of Libby's dream was she wanted to be buried in the garden. And she's buried in the garden now. Over here, there's two American flags, one on each side. I call her a true warrior of community activity. She had a very unusual sense of humor. And a very sharp tongue. And all.
I second that.
But she was priceless in her own being. So welcome, thank you all for attending. Anybody who would like to speak, this fellow is recording this event, and you're welcome to come up here and say anything you want about Libby. Thank you.
If anybody wants a microphone.
Do we need the microphone?
Yes.
Could you guys all hear me?
Well, unfortunately, with the
We
air
need the
conditioner.
mic.
Okay.
They're on behind us.
Hello, good, that's working much better. Okay, so
Mr. Mike.
we have the microphone. Sally, would you like to tell us about her academia things that she's
Sure.
known? I know she's like world famous in some way about community gardens. This is Sally McCabe.
The really scary thing is, Libby hired me right out of college. Well, not quite. She didn't hire me right out of college. She said that woman will never, that girl will never survive in the city. And a couple of months later, I get this call to say, well, we reconsidered. The truth of the matter is that the guy they hired instead of me never showed up for work. Collected a paycheck for 3 months, never showed up for work. So they hired me, and now I've turned into Libby, which is, except that I'm a whole lot nicer. She was mean. She was nasty. She was one of the funniest and smartest people I ever met in my life. And I learned so much from her. She started this garden, and by hook or by crook, she was going to get this garden made permanent. And I think 1980, I don't know. Eventually, it became permanent because it was federal general surplus land, and she managed to convince the mayor and city council to fight for it, and they got this garden deeded to the Neighborhood Gardens Trust, which was to the city Yeah. through hook by crook and the Neighborhood Gardens Association, which is now the Neighborhood Gardens Trust. She got this. It's designated parkland, and it is permanent.
It's federal.
So it is.
Sally, please don't forget to mention her co-partner and warrior, because they fought a lot, Cynthia Lafferty. Because if Cynthia was
Okay, I
married-
can't tell the history of the garden, but I can
No,
hand
no,
the mic to you for that.
Okay, because Cynthia's just as important as Libby in that respect.
Right, but she's not dead and buried.
Oh,
yeah,
she is right over there.
She's also here?
Her stone's
Damn!
right over there.
I had no idea. Okay, well, we're going to take a moment of silence for
And they're
Cynthia,
not next to
because
each other on
Cynthia
purpose.
was amazing, and she was a whole lot nicer than Libby as well. And she was equally persistent, and they got this garden preserved.
Thank you.
I had a plot in this garden from 1977 to 1985, when she threw me out because I changed jobs and I didn't work for her anymore. She threw out everything in my desk. because I went to work for the NME. I went to work for the Horticultural Society. And so, but I got to, what?
And I took your
And you took my place. Doris took my place. Actually, Doris and Mary and Rick took my place. It took 3 people to replace me. See, I told you I turned into Libby. But she did more for community gardening than any other person. Probably, I easily in Philadelphia, probably in the world. She did more to make community gardening an acceptable thing and is something to be expected. And so I will be eternally grateful to her for that. She continued. She also not just made community gardening acceptable, but she really pushed the whole agenda through the Extension Service and through her work with the American Community Gardening Association and her work with NGT. She put urban agriculture in general on the map, and so that's an amazing thing as well. I'm sure I'm missing a whole lot of partners and a whole lot of stuff, but I loved Libby and I hated Libby, and I loved Libby and I hated Libby. And I had a nice conversation with Blaine Bonham last night, who was unable to come, but he made me promise to bring cat hair and cigarette butts. And what I'm missing is black coffee. But that just sort of summed up Libby for Blaine and for me and for a whole lot of people. And I would love to put this microphone down and give it to someone else. So who's up?
I'll take over.
All right.
So Larry and I came into the garden in 1985, and Cynthia and Libby were in the middle of preserving the garden. And so at some point beyond that, I became the secretary, and I also then in 2000, when I was kind of pulling together stuff, I asked Libby if I could go through all the folders to create a scrapbook. And that's when I learned the depth of what Cynthia and Libby had done. The amount of paperwork, the letters written at every level, to state senators, to the feds, to city officials, back and forth, because it was federal land. And this was just at the time after Reagan had gotten elected, and Watt, I don't know if you remember Secretary of Interior Watt, he wanted to sell off all this federal land, and this was this surplus land. So that's when I was truly impressed by, man, it was Libby and Cynthia in there writing letter after letter after letter to get this thing transferred to the city, so that then the city could transfer it to Neighborhood Gardens Association, now the trust, so that it could be permanently preserved. So it was extraordinary. I didn't have quite the same love-hate affair. I got reamed out by Libby on occasion, but I have to say I learned so much from her, and she was the funniest. She had a spicy, sharp wit that you had to admire so much. And I brought, I used to cut out Libby's articles. She wrote gardening columns for the Daily News and the South Philly Review, and I would cut them out partly just because they always filled with good information, and they just had this breezy, witty style. So I made a copy of one about ginger, so that's everybody can take one if you want. As a kind of memento, and reread and do things with ginger. But anyway, so yeah, it was. It's nice to be here with all of you guys who used to garden with. So anybody else want to take on?
My husband and I joined the community garden probably about 85, maybe 84, and Libby was the one who suggested to David that he become a beekeeper. And so he was the first person who brought the bees to the garden, and now, has since carried on with many different people, including Barbara, and a lot of different people. Right. So I just wanted to bring that in. Who's next?
So I'm loud, as always. always. My husband says I'll talk to anybody, so I will happily talk to all of you today. Kevin and I joined the garden 1978, so it was pretty new, and we joined with Cynthia Lafferty. She was our upstairs apartment dweller. We lived in a trinity. She had the upstairs apartment, we had the downstairs apartment. So the three of us had a plot right in the back corner. And originally this was a parking lot where all these row homes face us on the back. And we were in the plot. I think this is the first time I actually met Libby, and I was picking the strawberries from the parking lot into my plot, and she was reaming me out, "Get off those strawberries." And I replied back in kind, "They're my strawberries." So that's my first encounter with Libby. But I have to confess that after that, we never had any words of the kind, and when we joined, we were the minority. I think Libby really wanted this to be a garden with people in different economic straits than most of us here today. And it was a joy for us to be here. And one other funny story that doesn't include Libby, but Kevin and I were picking all our strawberries. We put them in a plastic bag, and poor Kevin turned around and stomped on the strawberries by mistake. So I let into him, and so all the old time gardeners love that she can throw down some good. So we had a lot of fun here, and we still do. Many a late night, there are lots of people. We would sit here till 10 o'clock at night, laughing and telling stories, and people are gone, but the memories remain, and the garden remains, and that's the exciting thing to me, that it changes, but at the same time it doesn't. Living things, green things, caring for things, being a community. And I think Libby would be thrilled to know that we have City Harvest. That was something that really didn't pretty much get rolling until she was pretty much almost out of the garden, that she was tired of gardening. She missed the old community in the garden, and I think that would really give her great solace. Anybody else?
I'll tell a Libby story.
Oh, I know you got some.
People ought to say their names because the
Lisa.
recording will
Lisa.
not know.
My
who
name
you
is
are.
Tom Hardenbergh. I've been in the garden for in excess of 23 years. I'm not the world's greatest gardener, but I know how to fix things and build things. And so over the years, the garden has changed radically from what it was when I first got here. There used to be a wood fence out front. Now it's a nice metal fence. I used to have to take care of the wood fence. This right here was a big slab of concrete. When we put in the solar electric, we cut a path through and buried all the wires underground. And then one of our presidents was offered money to put down this brickwork. When we put the brickwork down, they built that barbecue over there. Now, we've always been famous here for our garden barbecue parties at the end of the year. And over the years, they, like everything else here, have evolved. They built this thing over here, and the first year that we tried to use it, I think we burned everything that we put on there. It was just so big and got so hot. Libby was irate because Libby was very involved with the barbecues. And she stood here one day and she cussed and swore at everybody that had anything to do with that. And I said to her, "Libby," I said, "you sound like a goddamn Republican. Stop complaining and give me a solution." And she went, "Repa-pa-pa-pa." She couldn't spit the damn word out. Over the years, all the building that we've done around here, Libby fought me on some things and was behind me on others. We have a composting toilet over there. Part of the reason that was voted in by the membership was because there were certain people who were tired of seeing Libby drop her drawers behind the figs when she had to take care of business. And so we got her a toilet. And I think that was the beginning of the end for Libby in the garden here. It got too tame for her. But, we revered Libby. Some of us fought with her like cats and dogs. But in the end, everybody knew that everybody's spirits were in the right place, and that we loved this place. And she was the mother of it all. And so, as we all gather together, maybe to say goodbye or just have a few fond memories, I think it's a good thing. Thank you.
Hey, Tom, could I do a little PS to that?
Yes, it's always good.
P.S. is always
And I'm sorry, I didn't introduce myself. I know most of you. My name's Carla Puppin, and Larry, my husband, and Larry and I gardened here from 1985 to 2000. So we've been here a long time. So in terms of Libby and fighting like hell to make sure that this garden would stay in perpetuity, and she was one of the key figures in that early years in which the Neighborhood Gardens Association was created, and it was created as a trust to preserve these community gardens in Philadelphia. And she did leave a bequest to Neighborhood Gardens Trust in her will, and that bequest was specifically designed to both make sure that Southwark Community Garden would go forward, and also that other community gardens would be preserved. And she named it, and you will all enjoy this very, very much. She named it the James Brightman, Libby Goldstein Bequest Fund. I think I have the time, but she included Shorty in it.
Good.
And so that's very cool, because she always saw she and Shorty were they worked together in the early years. But that was Libby too. That as she was thinking about the future, and she was thinking about making sure that urban community gardens would be preserved forever. And so I just wanted to add that.
Add 2 seconds to James Brightman.
Oh, okay. So for those of you who don't know, James Brightman, we all knew him as Sonny. Shorty. What did I say? Sorry. Did I? Okay, sorry. Shorty lived just 2 doors down. He and his wife, now I have 2 different stories, that he was the committee person, and then I've also heard that she was the committee person. But in any case, Shorty knew everybody and anybody in this entire area. And if you needed something done, you came to Shorty. And so he knew the ropes, so when Libby was going to start the garden, because the first plot had been over on 2nd Street, if I'm correct, the first plot, and then they were kicked off. She immediately knew that it was Shorty she needed to go to really get other people behind, and then to find people to garden. Yeah, and I can't remember when Shorty died. When we came in 85, he was still gardening, but then he was
I
sick.
came in 90 and he was still gardening.
Yeah, so
I don't know if he was gardening, but he actually would unlock and relock the gates. They were unlocked all day, and then before he went to bed, he locked them.
anybody else?
I remember that when Libby would laugh, her eyes would light up. And I thought she was just such a beautiful woman at that time. She was laughing, and she could laugh.
And we would all wish she left.
And to add to the Shorty story, I know that Libby would also tell me how I'm a committee person now over in a different section, and often battled Cianfrani when he was in power in this neighborhood. But Libby always gave him credit for having helped with the garden. I think he did. He was the state senator at that time.
Hi, my name's Karen Flora. I'm the current chair of this garden, and I didn't know Libby, but I just want to say what an honor it is to be here. First of all, to be here ever on any given day is an honor, and so, but it's an honor to be here with you guys as you remember Libby. So many of us who are now in the garden we don't know the history, we don't have that same roots, but next generation's here to push forward. But it's really good to have the background and know the spirit in which this garden was created. So thank you for being here.
I'm Barbara Seiple, and I think Delaney and I think, came into the garden we must have come in '86. And but Libby was always, she was very giving of her knowledge and sharing of her produce. And even though her horseradish was spreading into the walkways, and we had to be careful with that because anything in the pathways was not supposed to be welcome. But she was very, very giving in terms of her knowledge and sharing her produce. She certainly was a legend.
I'm Ed Belt. I came into the garden probably in the early 90s. And after the first couple of years, I ended up being across the aisle from Libby, which was not a good place to be. And I had done some gardening. I thought I knew a couple of things. But Libby had the way of just coming up, taking a look at what you're doing and going, I wouldn't do that if I were you. Or, have you ever thought about doing it this way? She always had advice, and what I found is that her advice was typically good. I learned a lot from her. And I didn't know the need for me so much, for whatever reason. For us, it was really more of a give and take kind of thing about gardening and occasionally, other life issues. But she was always a terrific neighbor, and over the years I realized what she had done. It was astonishing. I really think she was a wonderful woman.
Would anybody else like to say anything? Stanley. And by the way, we could put those things in. Libby's great.
Okay, thank you.
Before you leave.
Before I leave.
Hello.
She'll appreciate it. She needs a smoke.
Yeah, right. It's been well for that one.
Yeah. I'm Stan Pokras. I'm Sally's husband. Early in our getting to know each other, I'm walking down the hall where Sally works, and there's a little window on a door, and I look in there, and there's a computer in there. I said, what's that? And she said, well, it's a computer. I said, well, what's it doing there? Well, we don't know. Nobody knows how to use it. So I said, well, do you think I can get in there? She said, well, you have to go and talk to my boss. So I go and talk to Libby, and I said, what are you doing with that computer? She said, well, we don't know because Penn State gave it to us, and it has all this stuff, but we don't know how to use it. And I said, well, how about you let me go in there and look at it? So she let me go in there. I look around. I see that there's manuals, there's software, there's a modem for connecting to the rest of the world, and 300 baud modem. There was a Diablo printer. So I went back to talk to her. I said, well, how about if I bought the software, we could set up a computer bulletin board. Oh, no, before that, I said, well, how about you let me come here regularly and teach your staff? I'll come in and study the manuals, and I'll teach the staff how to use the computer, which was before I was a computer consultant. But that's how I became a computer consultant, because I learned how that I could read the manuals and teach people. So I was learning faster than my clients because I was trying. After a couple months of that, I was publishing a newsletter about networks of people. And part of my newsletter publishing got me connected to people who were starting computer networks. That the Apple Computer Company was giving away 5 computers to a group of organizations so that they could be able to network. And and they were using a particular piece of software. So I was reading up on the software, and it was $300. But I went to Libby and I said, how about if I buy the software, could we set up a computer bulletin board to provide community gardening information to whoever wants to log on? So she agreed to let me do that as long as I would have it on a timer so it would go off in the morning and come on at night. So it was allowed to have connection at night, and it had an automatic. And I had a little VIC-20 that I was able to use to log into it from my house. So when it was up and running, I could manage it remotely. And Libby started writing articles and putting them on there. And people started to call. Only one person could be on at a time, but you could leave messages for any of the other users. And you could post general messages to everybody. So this became GardenWorks. GardenWorks was the first gardening bulletin board in the whole world. Nobody had a gardening bulletin board. 2 years later, Penn State decided that they needed to do something, and they put up a statewide network. But we were first. And that was the beginning of my consulting with nonprofits, and I went on to running nonprofit technology resources for the next 20 years. And so Libby gave me my start. And Libby took over as the SysOp when we stopped being there and GardenWorks was no longer. I got a grant from Apple because I was doing that work with Libby. And the grant I got from Apple came to me not through the Apple committee. They had a committee that were reviewing the applications. Sally introduced me to Maurice Sampson, who taught me how to write my first proposal. And I was writing that proposal because I had gone to a conference in Washington, D.C. where they were, well, that's later. Okay, I got my time confused. Anyway, I had met, through the conference in Washington, D.C., I met the philanthropist at Apple Computer. And at that point, I was already helping with certain kinds of, I ran the GardenWorks, that's right. So as we were watching a lecture on how to make communications happen through a computer bulletin board, I'm explaining to the people around me what's going on to the technical aspects of it. And Mark Vermillion, who is Apple's philanthropy person, said, I thought you were into paper-based conferencing. Oh yeah, but I run the GardenWorks. I have a computer bulletin board. And with the same software that you're giving away to the others. He said, well, why don't you write an application? Why don't you send an application to us? And I said, okay. And Maurice Sampson helped me write an application with his 4 organizations in New Jersey. The New Jersey Years. We wrote the proposal. I get a phone call from Mark Rubens a couple months later. I'm sorry, but your proposal was denied. The committee didn't fund it. But I have some old Apple II computers. They were giving away Apple IIe computers at that time. I have some Apple II computers if you would want those. I said, oh, sure, of course. A couple weeks later, big truck pulls up, and out comes dozens of boxes because each of the 5 computer networks had several boxes that had the pieces parts in them. And I put that together and called the one in my office was called the Apple to Eat because it was to the New Jersey Years, the environmental youth network that Maurice was running. So things moved on from there, and I guess I should stop. Libby was, now I'm on the verge of trying to fix the world using computer technology and the Zoom program, and I watch a daily talk show, and I lead a group of people to discuss the contents of that daily talk show. And we're trying to figure out what to do next about climate change.
Too many barbecues.
Is that everybody?
Oh, one more thing. I'm having lunch with Libby at her house, and she's telling me about the process for making lunch and doing the dishes, and she says what's really important is that you wash the pan, the frying pan, while it's hot. So that's what I do. I wash the frying pan while it's still hot, and it's easy to clean because it's still hot and the grease doesn't stick. So I learned that from Libby.
Yes, we talked about that. This is a mural from the famous South Streeter, Isaiah Zagar, who created the Magic Garden on a 1000 block. And he came here and he did this wall actually for Libby. It says Libby's Dream. He named it after whatever it was. I guess it had a name at that time. You know. Well, I'd like to thank everybody for coming here and sharing your stories of Libby. She's kind of missed and not missed at the same time. And I kind of felt honored, actually, basically, that the neighbor next door to Libby found me, but she didn't really know who to contact, and she went on Libby's Facebook page and saw that I had wished Libby happy birthday. And she found me and told me what was happening with Libby. Libby was on her way to the hospital at that time, hadn't had the stroke yet, and told me that Libby's wish was to be buried in the garden. So I'm fulfilling Libby's wish that I got secondhand, and thank you all for coming here and helping me do this. I know a lot of you, I've been basically active in the community since 1970, so welcome and thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
And Sally, we have a shovel and we can bury the cigarette butts with her.
I'm really sorry they're filtered.
Did she smoke for the cigarettes?
No, she was a Pell Mell girl.
Well, as
Whole
a smoker,
mall, she
you
said.
can tear the filters off and smoke them backwards.
She would have done that.
She would have done that. Okay, thank you.
Do you remember her favorite? She would always say, most excellent. That's
Yes,
most excellent.
absolutely.
So I think she would have said most excellent to this. If anybody wants a copy of one of her gardening, I will gladly distribute. Most excellent. She's a great writer.